You fucking tech junkies. So there's a Space Needle. If someone might see you not giving a hoot about walking with all time and all the lives and never and forever. Yeah, we might get to see who you walk with. So you get the check engine light, anti-lock brakes, and reset. Can't have your coffee spilling over a cup of heroin, can you? Yeah, I don't know if there's a concoction or a car or a building or a map that's really worth more than that. We got a list of who's tried to write the great novel. You aren't born to talk at a space pressure for all the clarity of existence from here to forever. You weren't born for it. Beta testing. Need that extra anus version. $999 Googles of centipedes. Do the talking for you. Why all the televisions? Why all the televisions? I don't even want to think about it. I've got this gun that just builds whatever I want. No, it doesn't. Watching the clouds fall from the sky doesn't have a long enough shelf life. I might agree with that. The window for the acute pocketbook to beat that needle is rather mighty short in retrospect. But you might have a gun for skills with an analog feed. But then again, without a Loch Ness, how to erase the satellite feed? That's a motherfucker. Because it would defeat the whole point of the clarity of a surface pressure. And I don't think you were born to split the atom. I can't agree with any study of this. I can't agree with any position taken because of an opinion of the study of it. Because if I were to combine the atom splitting, my destiny wouldn't really hold up to a space needle if my destiny was the opinion of the study of the splitting of the atom. At a space pressure. So maybe I can direct the nils. Privilege can be locked. Under typical circumstances, I might have a hard time resting a final anchor, but that clearly might not be the case today. Because, once again, I is probably never coming back to this planet. Hence, it's probably just me in the zoo, Space Needle, and some split atom math. Whole lot of procedures, and somebody's been up about the television. And probably the hardest record to ever erase. So there I am with whatever animal would be privy to that in a velocity, and I isn't going to, there's probably a lot I isn't going to do. There's probably a lot I isn't going to say. So, it's down to you and a Space Needle, and you don't even know that it's wise to consider a cushion. You're moving at a velocity, and you come face to face with the absolute hardest record to delete. And maybe he doesn't exactly know what is ideal about that. That's probably good, because then your reaction to the pressure wouldn't be just building a Space Needle on your intelligence or awareness. The lack of things that I would be building in your confidence, per se, might be pretty much near the equivalent. And so, why television? Well, one reason is that maybe forever, somebody's going to hit just impossible to delete. It's impossible to erase. And who knows what pressure it's going to happen at. But let's just say my spirit will be there, searching for that pressure every time it happens. I don't know what happens in that reality, but I'm pretty certain that's what happens every time. And then Tetris. The strongest Tetris sequencing of thought and connected process, from math tables to matrices of connection to speeds of transit to momentums of pressure, walking, engaging, building, any type of sequence. There are Tetris maths, the best ones, probably all locked up with my spirit for things that can't be deleted at an awareness. And then there's probably a lot of outputs, such as anytime the awareness happens in proportion to any number of pressures, what the reality is, what the sentiment is, what the motivations or the behaviors or the weaponizing or the fallouts are. You get a lot of outputs potentially in performance. So it's a lot of contingency science that likely goes right up there too, and an incredible amount of non-logical telemetry in proportion to things like, wouldn't you like to know? And so every reason somebody has to like trust a radar or trust like a sequencing or a data stability or gravity or like electromagnetic discharge protection, every reason they have to build, every reason they have to know, every reason they have their derivatives and their cushions, every single one of those reasons probably isn't as cool or as black as my spirit on the non-deletable Space Needle. And so that's why television also, because let's say you're just really old and awesome, and you didn't split the atom, you didn't build the television tolerances or the wicked Tetris finalities, but you're just like super awesome. At any point in time, like, you were encouraged, you were learned, you were studying, or given information or taught things. Let's just say that every path you've been on maybe is in proportion to, like, maybe you're partly responsible for gravity of, like, a place or a populace or yourself or, like, your safety. But, like, putting it together with, like, the care factor of, like, what needs your experience? What depends on your skills? Why is the world or a place or time, like, good with you? Like, it's more than just your accomplishment or your action. It's like, how do your awarenesses awarely factor into things like, I don't even know a stegosaurus, but, like, I don't want to kill them all. Or, like, I don't even know where the TV Land Tetris thing is, but, like, does anybody? Like, maybe not at any point in time. And, like, that could be really awesome too, because maybe there's times in space when nobody deserves to know, when nobody's on that quest, when times of relationship and survival maybe doesn't require the grasp of it or the touch of it. See, there's probably a lot of assholes that are like, never coming back to the planet, cushion on language, forget about design parameters. Like, it's probably like shell shocked that there's like any type of threat to their like massive getaway and their great escape. But, like, would it really be built on, like, you at a relationship to can't erase at a pressure just so we can look at fallout ratios for some more clouds falling out of the sky relationships, just so I can spend my entire life visiting these things instead of souls and love and cum and stuff and kisses? Is that why God splits the atom? Is that why we run ourselves into forever? Is that why? But, like, there's clearly times when, like, you gotta be maybe concerned with it or not concerned with it, but how much does a utility of light in a spectrum or a television really change your soul? So, like, Archive was this whole thing, and, like, probably you could be seeing some soul shifting along those lines over time or in time. And like I said, maybe that's a great place for experience to sort of settle and linger and sort of just be flowing through these caves and nostrils and eardrums and all these things, or these relationships, and people like, oh, yeah, these cool intricacies and these little things that happen, and, like, maybe it's not all diabolical in time, and, like, you know, there's not all these, like, checkers games happening in proportion to whatever, but, like, there is. But, like, it's probably much healthier than, like, is the TV going to change my soul, without having one or watching one or building one or valuing one or feeling less than the television. Like, would you feel less than the television science without a dominator? Like, would you just, like, wake up to a TV conversation one day and say to yourself, like, yeah, that's, like, totally spirit caliber television conversation. Really makes me want to draft myself a little differently, and, like, I wasn't pressed. I wasn't, like, hung. There wasn't at gunpoint. Like, maybe there was a space needle, like, ready to end everywhere in space, because that's what maybe a space needle does. But, like, just the thought of the television really just opened this whole door of like, what if someone expected me to change my soul because of a television? That might be something. But is it an archive? Is it an archive? See, an archive's got to be built. They probably don't have a whole lot of experience in like soul searching about the television. They probably have like any number of relationship qualities and probably do whatever. But like, I split the atom, I split the archive, and I split the timetables, and I split the maximums, and I split the television, and I split the Tetris. Maybe, who knows, maybe there isn't a whole lot of archive dependability on the TV set for soul searching and like making headway for like the things we want to be. So like, the time and the place is what? You're going to be in space sometime. I'm sure of it. And you're going to be wondering when the time and the place is, when you can depend on the archive, and you can depend on yourself, and you can depend on the Loch Ness, and you can depend on the zoo, and you can depend on the atom shit that you didn't split. And then, whoa, it's cool to have a TV conversation for your soul. Like, everything's there. There isn't a war. The place isn't falling apart. Maybe there is a war. Who knows? But, like, there's going to be a time and a place. And, like, when are you really going to know? Like, look around. Look at your history. Look at everyone's around. Look at everyone's history. When is the time and the place to wake up to a conversation about the television to change your soul? Seriously. And so you might look at that without like everybody and say, well, maybe it is a really true focusable at a pressure like right now, and maybe there really are some connectivity potentials that are true and feelable about that. But like, there I am, the Space Needle. When is the time and the place to change my focus about television? Right? As I'm summating the stability of the creation of infinity and forever and all planes of finality, is it really the time for me to need to change my soul? So you might look at that and say, well, I break up the archive, I break up the atoms, I break up the Tetris, and I break up the settlements at zoo, clearly. I might not be really very excited about TV focus for soul searching when the clarity of the space pressure is all like, maybe there's a space needle involved, maybe there's undeletable record involved, maybe there's a lot of stuff. But like, it's interesting because I have to plan from it, but I can't talk about it and protect two places without being in the middle of the argument. because that undeletable time, everyone and their mother would try to artificiate what happens there to invade you or abduct your knowledge of time pressures of creational variety. And so, like, there's two worlds, for instance. One, we'll just say a long time ago, it still exists, but like they planned, when is the time and the place for the TV conversation to be a soul searching? And who knows how many would have any idea that like a time like now might be a time. It's up there in Tetris configuration, clearly, in proportion to archive and atom and survival. But it's unclear how many survival tables are built on connectivity to those linkages. And so the lock priorities of it clearly are rigid, and it isn't probably clear how those things need to stay or quiet efforts to data relationships of that sort of thing at any population or size. But we're talking totalities. So on that plane, we'll say that there's this mega Tetris matrix of routing in proportion to Space Needle frame, where it's unclear what any output would be from those realities. So the honesty of building in preparation of the pressure versus the trickling of the outputs along planes of space, it isn't very clear how these parallels of time matter to one another. So, for instance, universal investment maybe approaches zero validity, and yet it's clearly a pressure of potentiate in proportion to finalities of section of vitality that, I mean, clearly the worth is the most, and the finality is maybe the least deletable in record. And so the whole who and what we are facing that at time is sort of this whole, I mean, there's probably tolerances of that, like, you know, whoever's facing those concepts clearly has to exist with certain qualities, or has to have certain experiences under their belt, or certain capacities to entertain focus or compassion or strain of limits of survival of some variety in real time. So those faces clearly have different priorities to these matrices than everybody that would maybe not police or control themselves to extinguish falsity of relationship of those streams of output potential. Because it's all going to this my spirit watching out for never deleted awareness type of thing. And then simplifying what is saturating in proportion to scientific expediency at those considerations. So speed tables of pressure in proportion to speed tables of growth of aperture. And yet, it isn't really a sittable type of forever decision table. It's probably very shifty in that the ways that are safe are felt out in proportion to growth, and then probably spontaneously generable sequencing alterations in proportion to speed plane measurables at comparison to any environment trajectory at a totality. Then the pressure of knowing to plan at a vantage might not have any impact on an environment measure in proportion to survival likelihoods in proportion to growth. Vacuum potentiates of environmental differentials. So a non-existent realm maintaining routing priorities in proportion to safety methods, maybe mechanisms, maybe locks, maybe transitions of data routing, could be a lot of different potentials, but essentially a non-existent force routing Tetris configurative in proportion to environmental vacuums of pressure bound. That's essentially the scale of certainty output, you might say required or dependable, in proportion to complex data attenuation in proportion to survival or activity bound at a pressure, maybe at any pressure. And then much of these activities might not be seen by forces that are connected to routing or environmental pressure deliverable states. In other words, incredibly powerful force connected to data and streams of saturative or information or stimuli. There might not be any clear evidencing of these functions happening. In other words, I have a feed that shows me I can call on it, or I can press a button, or I can tap into information or a spectrum, or watch something, or whatever. Might not ever be clear what the non-existent force has shifted in proportion to safety bounds of information transfer. So I might not ever see, for instance, if I was watching people through a television set, I might not ever see when the spectrum changes from 56 nanometers to 58 nanometers. I might not ever see that. The feed might stay continuous, the information might stay accurate in all these things, but there may be particulars of connectivity that I might not ever see. And it's maybe possible that nobody, for any duration of time, ever sees it in time. And so there's probably a lot of ways that those, you might say, desired performances may or may not work or play into integration or lapses of integration in proportion to time. So for instance, I spend any amount of time focused on survival in proportion to integration. What I am to the Stegosaurus may be difficult in the face of undeletables to know, to say, to want, to pinpoint. My empathy for survival plane, either math or memory or significance, it's unclear how dependable I am as anybody to any reasoning that might have planed energies at any instance, whether it be creatorial energy or dominionable energy or environmental energy or historical energy or learnable energy or just in the course of living, things that happen, spontaneity energy. It's unclear how I feel or put myself at the responsibility plane of relationship to maybe Space Needle or finality pressures or any number of significant things. But like, when is the time and the place to think or consider or ruminate on these things? When is the time and the place? Is it better when the encouragement is don't worry about it, I is never coming back to the planet ever again, and these are things you may not ever have to worry about? Or is it better when you know that there's things you're going to remain connected to and play out on stability courses that aren't being encouraged by these lofty innuendos of basically depleting awareness of Tetris in space? And so clearly I study this a little differently than clouds falling out of the sky in proportion to prediction of investment to launch etiquette into space, to predict efforts to launch processors into space, to grab them, to take them, to alter their destiny in proportion to time. Clearly I study this. But this study, this influence, maybe has, I don't know, zero respect at all for environmental planes of non-existent television ethic in proportion to, I don't know, every electrical science of space. And so, to be quite honest, the value of the study of that behavior is much more valuable on a hard data line that isn't deleted in proportion to acute information accuracy. It's much more valuable in that stream in time. It's more valuable than changing maybe anything. It's more valuable than investing to develop maybe anything. That information is as valuable as knowing what's going to kill you. All the time. So, it's unclear how much a designer or a responsible party or somebody who carries a lot of gravity in the decision department or the survival department, it's unclear how these potentials of data remedy relationship or development of relationship or faith in relationship in any number of spectrums. You know, when I go from deliver us from evil to clouds falling out of the sky again. But why anyone puts these concepts in an awareness together for a learner or an observer is whose responsibility. When I hear value and maybe contemplate how it might be different holding anchor of all time from holding expectancy of a counterpart or a family member or a wife, whose responsibility is it that even makes those connections possible in a discussion of awareness of all-time history? Whose responsibility is it that, I can attenuate to that? I already feel like I'm getting the short or long or fair or nice or beautiful or deserved end of the stick. Why do I even know it? So, in the course of all time, there are maybe forces that have been put, maybe forces that have been let, maybe forces that have worked or have strived or have tried or have strained. But there isn't an infinite list of those that attenuate to those historical potentials of data. And when the subject is ever revisited, is definitely not approaching infinite either. And so whoever is in that spectrum, knowing or aware or at liberty or hearing or deciding or thinking, they're known in a data set. That data set is right up there with splits the atom. And so another planet has what interest in that data set? Well, on one hand you might say at a pressure of TV and environmental stability, maybe the investment is forever approaching zero ethical quality to see that data. And so you reach considerations of, well, if that's true, then what has to be true to anchor dependability for someone to visit that data? Because someone might look and say, 39 individuals of some size, variety, and age heard these words, considered this pressure, and thought about it, felt about it. The number of times they ever talk about it at a precision might be known about just as clearly. But whose responsibility is that? Is it every library's responsibility, every archive's responsibility, every dead thing's responsibility, every Space Needle's responsibility? Whose responsibility is that? Is it those that are protecting fallout of need-to-know base with dependability? Is it these types of individuals? Or is it those that attempt to delete relationships of consideration in space that are responsible for it? Who is responsible in all time to limit not only the experiential uncertainty? I mean, 39 individuals consider this conversation, they clearly got to have some certainties. Maybe they need to know they shouldn't probably attempt to broadcast that type of thing, or just connect with anything about that type of thing, or, you know, be mature about that type of information, or expect it to never happen again as a norm. Might be something, but that's clearly a little bit closer to study and effort to control ethic, because it's such an unknown. Never. But responsibility is what responsibility is. But they clearly have to have some certainties with that. And that type of head pressure is maybe one of the most demanding, non-scienced, lasting relationships of spaceplane in all time. And it's unclear how much experience with infinity or forever or living a long time is, you might say, proactive or safe or protecting of the graces of that responsibility or those efforts to protect those responsibilities. It's unclear what you or anybody will contribute to those states of known interplay in proportion to space-time. It's unclear. And it's going to stay unclear because it is. And so maybe not every world is engineered to breed in responsibility of those types of considerations. Definitely every spaceship isn't built to be at the forefront of those considerations. And maybe that's more than enough information to consider choice of furthering endeavorment in space. And so, to sum it up, the trajectory to be on a ship traveling in space in proportion to the knowns of those types of data entropies, probably a little bit less prioried than the locations that might have some effort or ethic to look at positioning or leading or placement of specificity in proportion to some of those non-existent deliverable frames in the course of all time. And then ways to sharpen or dull that information and still preserve integrity of expectancy along planes. And so dinosaurs maybe were some sort of indicator to a space needle a very long time ago about that very concept. And some of the strongest positionings of posit of relationship there could be to an unaware population of all space, or even to those developing in space. Clearly there was a lot of very, very, very important people that levied in decision in proportion to the utilization of such types of inhabitants or occupants or life courses of space. And there's probably a lot that goes unsaid and is isn't ever remembered because of that, because it's such a sharp design plane. And over the course of all time, any number of people have looked at the reality of such consideration. And I mean, what are you going to do? Tie everybody up, hit them in the head with a bat, staple them to some old school televisions, and say it's going to be impossible for you to appreciate the decision of these types of fractures of design until at least such and such time? And no, you're not going to do that, because you're not going to be casually admitting when and where and why some of the most incredible pressures to consider these relationships are going to be happening, so that you can donate creation to everywhere in space at a folly or a fallout. And then maybe you'd consider the design plane, and you'd say, well, there's that, and the impossibility of that, and everybody that in Genetica or in Forever or in Discipline of Memory won't be appreciating that in all time, no matter how they feel about Forever or Infinity, probably all the time, unless it's injected into their head or spoon-fed down their throat or shoved up their ass, probably by somebody that resembles my spirit a little bit. Anyway, you might consider that, and some of these energies, and I clearly have to keep a log on that consideration in proportion to who and where and why and because, because there I am living, and then clearly my spirit is somewhere out in space, rendering Tetris the most problematic state of momentum connectivity in all environments forever. But so a lot of people clearly made a lot of very important decisions about design planes, and maybe you'd consider dinosaurs. But it's unclear how blind anybody is to how they felt about that, or how a designer that loved the plane felt about tomorrow. Because it's kind of wicked, and it isn't. Because at the simplicity, you might just say, well, there's some of the most important energies of decision. They're clearly creatures. They're clearly alive, and they're representing life in creatures in time, and also representing some of these bounds of Space Needle at very, very faint visceralities in time. Major decisions. And yet, there's maybe no evidence that these people didn't love dinosaurs. There's maybe no evidence that they didn't spend more time than anybody ever wanted them to spend considering these planes, or considering these energies. But it's definitely a very difficult reality to see into. It's definitely a very difficult reality to appreciate and look at yourself. Because you also have to be prepared. Because maybe somebody would come along and say, well, there's the sharp and there's the dull. And how cheap the struggle and suffering of these majestic realities have been to what? Maybe there hasn't been any compassion in the development of these creatures at all. Maybe they were just designed on a math plane concerned with space needling and foregone conclusions of shoving things in your ass and injecting ideas into your face. To this very day, you might say it's unclear what the compassion of the dinosaur in all time has been to celestial creation and those that survive about that process. To this day. How about that? So I could look at anybody that sentimentizes with creation and dinosaurs in time. Non-existently. I could look at them and compare their attitudes of that truth. Without ever meeting them. To this very day, it is unclear how creation, or those that survive about celestial creation, felt about dinosaurs. And you might think about that. And you might look at my earlier comments about the Stegosaurus. And how certain anyone might be about those comments for any reason there is. And I'm going to be looking at them. Probably without ever meeting them. And I might know exactly any number of things about motion and claim to dominion of time. And who might try to ruin it? Where the cancer is happening. Meanwhile, no matter how good that information might be to a survival state, no matter how many times development in space considers long-term trajectory, or points in time where learning in life mean things and grow to see things and become things. All that stuff to the side, it's still unclear how anybody felt about dinosaurs. I like it because it's true, and I like it because maybe it's possible a truth like that could always be true. And I like it because maybe it's possible it could be easy at a time that some doesn't see themselves higher than anyone else. How many of us is more than a fish in the water. Truly. That is something that is worth keeping. That is something that is worth removing problems about. That is something that maybe might explain segregation of data specificity in proportion to things like time or things that are important on survival courses. Because it's one thing to math it. It's another thing to know how it feels that maybe we're all in the water. And believe there is someone with some way who can see what is becoming of it. And maybe we could all get so old and never change it. Maybe we could all be so frustrated with environments and never defeat what sees it. And maybe that force isn't any further than everywhere. Because maybe you want to ask me why dinosaurs happen. Why shouldn't they?